Imagine earning millions of dollars a year,
Yeah.
paid for entirely by taxpayer money, just to be the mayor of a city.
Right. It sounds insane.
It really does. Like,
Yeah.
for most of the world, that sounds like a headline about blatant, unchecked corruption.
Oh, absolutely.
Sounds like the punchline to a joke about broken politics, you know? But according to the incredibly bold master plan we are analyzing today, paying public servants like billionaire tech CEOs might actually be the only way to save one of the most paralyzed, chaotic, and rapidly growing megacities on Earth.
Yeah, it really forces you to completely rethink the value that we place on leadership in the public sector.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are jumping into this comprehensive, really fascinating manifesto titled Netizen Transform Bangalore.
Right, and as the title suggests, it focuses on Bangalore, which is India's undisputed tech capital.
Right.
But looking closely at this document, I mean, it becomes clear pretty quickly that this is not just a localized policy paper.
No, not at all.
It's really a masterclass in global urban design. The author is essentially ripping up the traditional city planning playbook, right?
Mhm.
And they're pulling the most radical, proven ideas from places like Singapore, Barcelona, Paris, and Silicon Valley to solve the compounding crises of modern megacities.
And to really grasp the sheer audacity of this blueprint, I think we have to understand the extreme dual identity of Bangalore.
For sure. It's a city of massive extremes.
It really is. Like, if you read the financial papers, you see the Silicon Valley of India. You see this absolute economic juggernaut, right?
Right. The wealth generation is staggering.
Exactly. It has the highest concentration of tech talent, venture capital, and, startup unicorns in the country.
Yeah.
But then if you actually walk the streets, the day-to-day reality can feel like a dystopian struggle.
Yeah, it's a completely different picture on the ground.
You're looking at traffic gridlock so legendary that it literally has its own subculture of internet memes.
The Silkboard Junction memes they're famous at this point.
Right. And you have severe water scarcity happening right side by side with monsoon flooding that, and this is not an exaggeration, leaves luxury cars floating down the street.
It's wild. The juxtaposition is just wild.
So think of it this way. Imagine you're tasked with upgrading an airplane's engine while it's currently flying at 30,000 feet.
That sounds terrifying.
Right, but that's the reality of fixing a booming megacity like Bangalore. But today's source material, it isn't just about swapping the engine. It's basically a manual for turning that plane into a spaceship.
I love that analogy. And the author's core diagnosis of that contradiction is fascinating.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Well, the manifesto argues that Bangalore's urban collapse is not a result of a lack of money.
Which is usually the first thing people blame.
Exactly. They say, oh, we just don't have the budget. But the author says, no, it isn't a lack of money. It isn't a lack of brilliant ideas. And it certainly isn't a lack of engineering talent.
Right, as a tech hub, they have plenty of engineers.
Exactly. The missing links are integration and execution. The city is essentially operating like a massive corporation where none of the departments are allowed to speak to one another.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It is. So the blueprint argues that by radically overhauling who governs, completely revolutionizing how water is treated, physically redesigning the streets, and building this ruthless tech incubator zone, you can elevate Bangalore to a top 10 global city by 2040 or 2050.
So if we were going to fix the engines on this airplane, I mean, we can't start with the wings, right?
You have to start in the cockpit.
Exactly. The blueprint makes it very clear that before we build a single bike lane or attempt to clean up a foaming, polluted lake, we have to look at governance.
Yeah, and this is where the manifesto throws its first really massive curveball.
Yeah, the salary thing. Let's get into that. Fragmented authority is identified as the absolute root cause of the city's paralysis, right?
Right. To understand this, you really have to look at the current administrative nightmare.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So Bangalore doesn't have a single unified leadership structure. Instead, it has this labyrinth of overlapping fiefdoms.
Fiefdoms, yeah. Like everyone has their own little kingdom.
Exactly. You have the BBMP, which is the municipal corporation, and they're responsible for civic amenities and solid waste.
Okay.
Then you have the BDA, the Development Authority, which plans the zoning.
Right.
Then there is the BWSSB, the board that manages water supply and sewerage, and they don't really coordinate.
Right. So to put that in real-world terms for you listening, it's like one agency comes in and finally paves a beautiful new road.
Yeah.
And then the very next week, A completely different agency brings in bulldozers to dig up that exact same road because they need to fix a leaking water main.
Exactly.
And neither agency communicated with the traffic police, who are now dealing with a 5-mile gridlock.
It is institutionalized chaos.
Yeah, and because nobody is truly in charge, nobody takes the blame.
Precisely. That lack of ultimate accountability is what destroys progress.
So what's the fix?
The manifesto's proposed solution is to tear down those silos completely. It calls for the creation of a single, empowered entity called the Greater Bengaluru Authority.
Okay, one authority to rule them all.
Basically, yeah. This body would have absolute clear jurisdiction over urban planning, transport, water, waste management, the environment, everything.
Wow.
And at the apex of this authority would be a directly elected mayor serving a fixed 5-year term.
And here is the shocker that I teased at the beginning. The manifesto proposes paying the single CEO mayor a salary of 5 to 10 crore rupees per year.
Yeah, which is a massive number.
Just to give you a mental model of that, that is roughly 600,000 to over $1 million annually.
Right.
And on top of that, there are massive performance bonuses tied directly to specific metrics like livability rankings, air quality improvements, and transit modal shifts.
Yeah, it's treated exactly like a corporate compensation package.
But let's pause here. I mean, in a country where the average citizen is grappling with inflation and poverty, proposing $1 million salary for a politician sounds borderline offensive.
Oh, it's incredibly provocative.
How do you possibly justify that to the electorate? Like, isn't this going to sound wildly elitist to the average citizen?
It sounds deeply elitist on its face, yes. But the author is relying heavily on the historical precedent set by Lee Kuan Yew.
The founding prime minister of Singapore, right?
Exactly. LKY, as he's often called. When Singapore became an independent nation back in 1965, it was a swampy, resource-poor island with immense poverty, racial tensions, and a completely uncertain future.
It was not the glittering metropolis we know today.
Not at all. But LKY possessed this brutal, unflinching pragmatism.
Okay.
He looked at the challenge of nation building and concluded that governing millions of lives and managing billions of dollars in infrastructure is arguably the most complex, high-stakes job in the world.
Well, yeah. If it is the hardest job, you need the sharpest minds. Cool. But I feel like the traditional public sector model relies on the idea of civic duty. You know, the idea that noble people will take a massive pay cut simply for the honor of serving the public.
Yeah, but LKY didn't buy that at all.
He didn't.
He fundamentally rejected it as a sustainable model. He argued that relying on civic virtue while paying sub-market rates guarantees a disastrous phenomenon called adverse selection.
Adverse selection. What does that mean in this context?
It means if you offer a low salary for a role that carries immense stress and responsibility, the brilliant engineers, the visionary turnaround specialists, and the top-tier executives, they'll just stay in the private sector.
Because why wouldn't they?
Exactly. The talent drain becomes absolute. You're left with a mediocre talent pool running the most important institution in the city.
But wait, are we really saying that only people motivated by extreme wealth are capable of running a city?
Wow.
Because that feels like a very cynical view of human nature. There are plenty of brilliant people who work in nonprofits or public advocacy who aren't demanding $1 million.
It's true, but LKY's argument wasn't just about the desire for wealth. It was about the opportunity cost and, more importantly, the systemic risks of underpaying.
Systemic risks like what?
Well, LKY pointed out 2 other devastating consequences of low public sector pay.
Yeah.
The first is corruption.
Right.
Think about it. When you have an underpaid official holding the pen on a $2 billion infrastructure contract, the temptation for bribes, kickbacks, and patronage is overwhelming.
Yeah, if they're making a fraction of what the contractors are making.
Exactly. The low salary practically invites backdoor deals just so the official can maintain a lifestyle commensurate with their level of responsibility.
That makes a dark kind of sense. And the second consequence.
It attracts a specific type of hypocrite. People who claim they want the office to serve the public on a meager salary, but whose actual motivation is to acquire power.
Oh, and then they weaponize that power to extract illicit wealth.
Exactly. So LKY believed that by paying an astronomically high, highly transparent salary, you completely remove the financial incentive for backdoor dealings.
Right, because they don't need the bribe.
Right. And you align the public servant's personal success directly with the city's success.
So in 1994, Singapore took this philosophy and actually codified it into law, right? with their benchmark formula.
Yes, exactly. They didn't just guess a number out of thin air.
Right.
They looked at the private sector and pegged ministerial salaries to the median income of the top earners across 6 professions:
Wow. Which ones?
banking, law, accounting, engineering, multinational corporations, and local manufacturing.
So they literally tied government pay to corporate wealth.
They did. They applied a slight public service discount, so it wasn't a one-to-one match, but the baseline was explicitly tethered to corporate success.
And today, an entry-level minister in Singapore makes around 1.1 million Singapore dollars.
Yeah, and the prime minister makes over double that.
That is staggering.
It is, but the global results really validate the methodology. I mean, Singapore transformed from a vulnerable, impoverished island into one of the wealthiest, most hyper-functional urban centers on the planet.
And they consistently rank in the top 5 of Transparency International's global index for the least corrupt countries. Right?
Exactly. The corruption was essentially priced out of the system.
You know, when you frame it like a high-stakes corporate turnaround, the logic snaps into place.
Yeah.
If a Fortune 500 company is hemorrhaging billions of dollars, the board of directors doesn't go out and hire a discount CEO to save money.
No, they pay top dollar for a proven leader who can stop the bleeding.
Right. And the manifesto applies this exact corporate logic to Bangalore. The city is currently losing billions of dollars in economic potential every single year due to gridlock, delayed projects, and bureaucratic inefficiency.
It's a massive drag on the economy.
So a 5 or 10 crore salary for a mayor is actually a rounding error, like a literal drop in the bucket, if that person actually possesses the execution capacity to unblock those billions in value.
Exactly. Democracy selects the leader through elections, but market-pegged pay ensures the competence of the pool of candidates who even decide to run.
Right. And the bonuses are key here, too.
Oh, the key performance indicators are vital. The mayor only gets the full payout if they actually move the needle.
So they can't just sit on their hands and collect $1 million.
No, absolutely not. The bonuses ask hard questions. Did the percentage of people using the bus network go up? Did the nitrogen dioxide levels in the air actually go down?
Right. Are the lakes visibly cleaner?
Exactly. It introduces ruthless, corporate-style accountability.
So let's assume the city takes this massive political gamble. We have successfully elected our elite, highly compensated CEO mayor. They sit down at their desk on day 1.
Okay.
What is the very first existential crisis they have to look at? Because according to the blueprint, it's water.
Yes. Water is the great equalizer.
Right. We move from the governance engine right into the biological survival mechanism of the city. Tell us about Bangalore's water situation.
Well, Bangalore's geographic reality makes it incredibly precarious. The city is situated high up on the Deccan Plateau, so it doesn't have a massive perennial river flowing right through its center, like London has the Thames or Paris has the Seine.
Yeah, there's no endless supply of flowing water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So historically, its survival depended on this brilliant ancient network of man-made lakes called kirs.
Kirs.
Yeah. They were constructed centuries ago by the city's founders to catch and store the monsoon rains.
But over the last few decades of hypergrowth, that ancient infrastructure was pretty much destroyed, wasn't it?
It was decimated. The lakes were filled in with concrete to build bus stands, tech parks, and luxury apartment complexes.
It's tragic.
And the natural topography that used to guide rainwater into those storage basins was choked off by unregulated sprawl.
Which leads to this terrifying paradox we mentioned earlier.
Right.
In August, a heavy monsoon dumps rain, the water has nowhere to go, and the tech corridors flood so badly that people are literally commuting in tractors.
It happens every year.
But then by April, the bore wells have run dry, the groundwater is depleted, and residents are fighting over private water tankers.
Yeah. It is a crisis of management, not a crisis of nature.
Okay, so how does our $1 million mayor fix it?
To solve it, the manifesto points our new mayor directly toward the Singapore water model.
Singapore again?
Singapore again, because Singapore's historical relationship with water was one of absolute vulnerability.
Why is that?
They have about 730 square kilometers of land and 0 natural freshwater lakes or large aquifers.
0. Wow.
0. In their early history, they relied almost entirely on pipelines importing water from neighboring Malaysia.
Which is a massive geopolitical liability. I mean,
Yeah.
you never want another country to have their hand on your literal faucet.
Exactly the realization LKY had. So Singapore created the Public Utilities Board, the PUB,
Okay.
much like the Unified Authority proposed for Bangalore. The pub is a single, omnipotent agency that manages the entire water cycle in a closed loop.
So no competing fiefdoms.
None. They oversee the supply, the drainage, the used water, the stormwater, everything. There are no competing agencies digging up each other's pipes.
And under the P, Singapore developed what they call the four national taps, right?
Right.
This is such a masterclass in diversification. You don't rely on just one source. So what is the first tap?
The first tap is local catchment. And this is incredible because despite being one of the most densely populated urban centers on Earth, they somehow managed to harvest rainwater from roughly 2/3 of their entire landmass.
2/3. How is that even physically possible in a city full of skyscrapers?
The engineering required for that is just staggering. They essentially turned the entire urban surface, the roofs, the streets, the parks, into a massive funnel.
Wow.
Through a complex network of drains and canals, they capture the rain before it hits the ocean and channel it into 17 massive reservoirs.
That is brilliant. Okay, so what's the second tap?
The second tap remains imported water from Malaysia. But because those bilateral agreements eventually expire, they knew they had to engineer their way to total self-sufficiency.
Right, which brings us to the fourth tap. We'll skip to the fourth for a second, which is desalinated seawater, which is brilliant because it is entirely drought-proof. The ocean never runs dry.
Exactly. But there's a catch.
Right, the energy cost. Pushing seawater through membranes to remove salt is incredibly energy-intensive and expensive.
Extremely expensive.
Which brings us back to the third tap, which the manifesto suggests is the ultimate key for Bangalore. The third tap is new water.
Yes. New water. It is high-grade, reclaimed wastewater. It is the ultimate closed-loop solution.
Okay, to put a vivid picture in the listener's mind, think about the human body.
Okay.
New water is like taking a city's digestive and waste system, the sewers, and magically transforming it into the city's circulatory and respiratory system.
That's a very graphic but very accurate way to put it.
Right. Traditionally, cities hide their sewage. They treat it just enough to not be toxic, and then they flush it out into a river or an ocean and just pretend it doesn't exist.
Out of sight, out of mind.
But new water captures that sewage, purifies it so aggressively that it strips away every single impurity and turns it back into pristine, drinkable water.
The technological sequence to achieve that purity is intense.
Walk us through it. How does sewage become drinking water?
It begins with conventional wastewater treatment to remove the solids.
Okay.
But then it gets fed into microfiltration or ultrafiltration. These are microscopic membranes that act like a sieve, filtering out suspended solids, bacteria, and disease-causing microorganisms.
Okay, so it filters out the gross stuff.
Right. The water that passes through is clean, but it isn't pure yet.
Then comes the heavy artillery, right? Reverse osmosis.
Exactly. Reverse osmosis, or RO, is the core of the magic. High-pressure pumps force the water through semi-permeable membranes.
Like the filters people have under their kitchen sinks, but on an industrial scale.
Exactly like that, but massive. The pores in these membranes are so unimaginably small that only water molecules can pass through.
So what gets left behind?
Dissolved salts, heavy metals, nitrates, and even viruses are physically blocked and left behind.
Wow.
After RO, the water is practically distilled. But as a final, absolute guarantee, it passes through ultraviolet disinfection.
So zapping it with UV light.
Right. Just to neutralize any hypothetical organism that might have somehow survived the RO process.
And the source notes that the resulting water exceeds the drinking water standards of both the World Health Organization and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency.
It's arguably cleaner than the water coming out of most natural springs.
That's incredible. Right now, NEWater meets about 40% of Singapore's total demand, and they are targeting 55% by 2060.
Yeah.
Now, I know most of this is used for industrial purposes like cooling towers and microchip factories, which actually require water cleaner than human drinking water.
Right.
But they also blend a portion of it back into the drinking reservoirs during dry months.
They do. But the real hurdle here wasn't the technology, it was the psychology.
Oh, I can imagine.
Overcoming the toilet-to-tap stigma is notoriously difficult. People have a visceral disgust reaction to the idea of drinking former sewage.
Yeah, it's a tough sell for a politician. Vote for me. I'll make you drink wastewater.
Exactly. But Singapore overcame this through massive public education campaigns, extreme transparency about the scientific process, and by giving it a brilliant branding name, NEWater.
Right. Much better than calling it recycled effluent.
100%.
But the technology only works if you can actually collect the waste. Bangalore currently has sewage leaking into storm drains, flowing into the lakes, and catching fire because of industrial chemicals.
Yeah, the Bellinder Lake fires. They're infamous.
Right. So how does Singapore collect every drop of used water so efficiently?
They built an invisible marvel called the Deep Tunnel Sewerage System, or the DTSS.
The DTS, yes.
It is a $10 billion infrastructure project hidden entirely out of sight.
10 billion.
Yeah. Instead of relying on a chaotic web of shallow pipes and hundreds of noisy, foul-smelling pumping stations scattered across the city, they bored massive tunnels deep underground.
Like subway tunnels.
Exactly. We were talking about a 206-kilometer network of tunnels, some as wide as 6 meters, buried up to 50 meters below the surface.
Boring 50 meters under a bustling city, navigating around subway lines and skyscraper foundations is an engineering triumph.
It really is. But the most elegant part of the DTSS is that it operates entirely by gravity.
Wait, really? No pumps?
No pumps. Because the tunnels are sloped deep underground, the water flows naturally to 3 massive centralized reclamation plants at the coastal edges of the island.
That's genius. So they eliminated the need for electrical pumps.
Right. It saves land on the surface, cuts energy costs, and ensures nearly 100% capture of used water.
Okay, so that handles the sewage. But what about the rain? You mentioned the flooding earlier.
Right. They didn't just hide the water infrastructure underground. They also addressed the surface water, the storm water, through the ABC Waters program.
ABC, what does that stand for?
It stands for Active, Beautiful, Clean.
Okay.
For decades, urban planners treated rainwater as a nuisance. They built ugly, brutalist concrete canals to blast the water out of the city as fast as possible to prevent flooding.
But concrete canals are dead zones, right?
Oh, totally. They are eyesores, they heat up the city, and when a flash flood hits, the water moves so fast through the concrete that it becomes a lethal hazard.
Right. So what does the ABC program do differently?
It reverses that philosophy. The manifesto highlights the Bishanang Mo Kio Park as the prime example.
Okay, what did they do there?
There used to be a rigid concrete canal cutting straight through this park. The government brought in bioengineers and landscape architects to rip out the concrete.
They literally tore out the canal.
Yep. They widened the channel and restored it into a natural, meandering riverbed using soil bioengineering, deep-rooted plants, and natural rocks.
So when the monsoon hits, instead of a dangerous concrete chute, what happens?
The river naturally swells into the surrounding floodplains of the park, absorbing the excess water safely.
Ah, it acts like a sponge.
Exactly. And when it is dry, residents have a stunning, ecologically rich park with otters and birds.
That is so cool. And applying this integrated approach to Bangalore is the blueprint's vision for survival, right?
Exactly.
If the new governance structure can reclaim and desilt the ancient lake networks, recreate the natural green buffer zones around them, and enforce a mandate that 100% of the city's sewage must be captured and treated to new water standards, the paradigm flips entirely.
It's a total 180.
The devastating monsoon floods are safely absorbed by the restored wetlands, naturally recharging the groundwater.
Right.
And the sewage, instead of poisoning those lakes, becomes an infinite recycled supply for the tech parks. You turn the liability into absolute security.
It's brilliant in its simplicity, even if the engineering is incredibly complex.
Okay, so our CEO-mayor has secured the water supply. The city's no longer drowning in August or parched in April.
A huge win.
Now we have to tackle the psychological toll of daily life.
Yeah.
We have to cure the gridlock.
Yes, the traffic.
The average citizen in Bangalore spends an absurd portion of their life staring at the brake lights of the car in front of them. The air is thick with exhaust and the noise pollution is constant.
It's soul-crushing.
How does the blueprint propose getting people out of traffic? For this, the manifesto leaves Asia and looks to Europe specifically, the urban planning revolutions happening in Barcelona and Paris.
Right. The goal here is a massive spatial reallocation.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, right now, urban geometry heavily favors the automobile. The manifesto envisions a radical shift toward public and non-motorized transit.
Okay.
The baseline requirements are aggressive. We're talking about building over 300 kilometers of physically protected bike lanes, fast-tracking massive expansions of the metro rail, and enforcing transit-oriented development.
Which means zoning for extremely high-density living and commercial space immediately adjacent to those metro stations, right?
Exactly. You want people living where the transit is. But the most disruptive spatial intervention the author proposes is the Barcelona superblock model, locally known as the Superilla.
I really want you, the listener, to visualize this because it is such an elegant concept.
It really is.
Picture a traditional city grid, like a tic-tac-toe board. You have 3 blocks across and 3 blocks down, making a square of 9 city blocks.
Okay.
In a standard city, cars drive on every single street between those 9 blocks. There are intersections everywhere, traffic lights everywhere, and danger for pedestrians everywhere.
Right, it's designed for cars to move through it as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
Mm.
The superblock model takes that 9-block square and fundamentally rewrites the rules of the road.
They draw a perimeter around those 9 blocks.
Now, what happens to the traffic?
All the heavy, fast-moving, through traffic, the buses, the commercial trucks, the commuters trying to get across town are forced onto the arterial roads that form the outside edge of the superblock.
So they can't cut through the middle anymore?
Nope. Inside the 9-block area, the streets are transformed. They undergo what urban planners call pacification.
Pacification. I love that word. It doesn't mean cars are banned entirely, though, right?
Right. If you live inside the block, or if you are an ambulance or delivering a refrigerator, you can still drive in.
But the physical design of the street changes. The asphalt is painted, planters are moved into the roadway.
Yes. And the speed limit is slashed to a maximum of 10 kilometers per hour.
10 kilometers, that is roughly 6 miles per hour. It is literally a walking pace.
Exactly. Because the hierarchy of the street has been inverted. Inside the superblock, the pedestrian is the king, the cyclist is second, and the automobile is a tolerated guest.
It's not a road anymore, it's a shared space.
Precisely. And the data coming out of Barcelona's implementation of this is staggering.
Really? What did they see?
By pacifying these internal streets, the city reclaimed up to 70% of the road space that was previously dedicated entirely to cars.
70%. That's a massive amount of real estate in a dense city.
Huge.
They took 4-way intersections where cars used to idle and spew exhaust, and they turned them into public plazas. They put in benches, playgrounds, and urban forests. They gave the space back to the people.
And it worked. The pilot programs showed drops in internal vehicle traffic by anywhere from 58% to 92%. The nitrogen dioxide pollution plummeted. The noise levels dropped so significantly that residents reported sleeping better. It literally quieted the city.
That is amazing. And this physical restructuring integrates perfectly with the next European concept highlighted in the manifesto, the 15-minute city.
Yes, this framework was developed by the urbanist Carlos Moreno and politically championed by Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris.
Right. The 15-minute city is basically a critique of modern zoning practices, isn't it?
Exactly. For a long time, we separated cities into distinct zones, a financial district here, a residential suburb way out there, an industrial park over there.
And that separation forces everyone to commute long distances every single day.
Right. The 15-minute city proposes designing or retrofitting neighborhoods so that any resident can access the 6 essential functions of life within a 15-minute walk or a short bike ride from their front door.
What are the 6 functions?
Living, working, commerce, healthcare, education, and entertainment.
You shouldn't have to get in a car and sit in an hour of traffic just to buy groceries, drop your kid off at school, or visit a clinic.
Exactly. It changes the fundamental metric of urban success.
How so?
Well, for decades, traffic engineers asked, how fast can we move a car from point A to point B? The 15-minute city asks, how easily can a resident access what they need without needing a car at all?
It is about proximity, not mobility.
Perfectly said.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this, though.
Go for it.
I understand why this works in Paris or in Barcelona's example district, which was meticulously laid out in a perfect grid in the 19th century.
Right, they have that perfect geometry.
But Bangalore is not a neat grid. It is famous for its rapid, chaotic, organic sprawl. It is a labyrinth of winding, narrow roads, dead ends, and irregular intersections.
It's very chaotic.
You cannot just drop a perfect 9-block Barcelona square onto a sprawling, unstructured megacity in the global south. How does the blueprint address that massive physical mismatch?
It is the most common critique of applying European models to Asian megacities. The manifesto counters this by focusing on the concept of polycentric density.
Polycentric density.
Aye.
It is not about forcing a rigid square onto a chaotic geography. Think of it more like the structure of a biological cell. A 15-minute neighborhood doesn't need to be square, it just needs a membrane.
A membrane that keeps the heavy traffic out of the nucleus.
Precisely. Even in chaotic sprawl, you have larger arterial roads. You designate those as the fast transit corridors.
Okay.
Then you look at the irregular winding neighborhoods nestled between those arteries, and you ring-fence them. You turn the internal labyrinth into a low-speed pedestrian priority zone.
Aye.
The source points to existing neighborhoods in Bangalore, like Indiranagar or Koramangala.
Right.
These areas actually already have a mix of homes, shops, cafes, and clinics. They are naturally mixed use. The problem is that they are choked with cars using them as shortcuts.
So you don't need to demolish buildings to create the 15-minute city, you just need to stop the through traffic.
But redesigning streets is incredibly expensive and politically dangerous. People hate losing parking spaces.
Oh, it's a huge political fight.
Shop owners panic that if cars can't drive right up to their storefront, business will die. How do you implement this without causing a massive political revolt?
You utilize tactical urbanism.
That's it.
This is a methodology of rapid, cheap, and reversible testing. You don't start by pouring millions of dollars of permanent concrete. You start with paint.
Paint.
Literally just paint. On a Friday night, the city comes in and paints the asphalt. They drag heavy wooden planters filled with trees into the street to physically narrow the roadway, forcing cars to slow down. They put out movable chairs and tables.
Oh, it is like a pop-up plaza.
Exactly. It allows the residents to actually experience the change without a permanent commitment.
Okay.
They realize that their street is suddenly quiet. Children can play outside without the threat of being hit by a speeding taxi.
And what about the shop owners?
The shop owners realize that foot traffic actually increases retail sales more than car traffic ever did.
Right, because people walking by are more likely to stop in than someone driving past at 40 miles an hour.
Once the community sees the tangible benefits, the drop in pollution, the increase in social interaction, the political resistance melts away.
That's really smart.
Once you have community buy-in, then the city brings in the concrete trucks to make the widened sidewalks and protected bike lanes permanent.
So let's take a deep breath and look at the city we have conceptually built here.
It's a completely different city.
It really is. We have a highly paid, ruthlessly accountable mayor. We have deep tunnel sewers capturing every drop of waste, massive high-tech reverse osmosis plants generating pristine drinking water, and lush parks absorbing the monsoon rains.
Yeah.
We have hundreds of kilometers of new metro lines and chaotic streets transformed into quiet, pedestrian-friendly, tree-lined plazas. It sounds like an absolute utopia.
It does.
But the obvious glaring question for anyone listening right now is, how on earth does a developing megacity pay for all of this? We are talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure. Are we just sketching science fiction here?
This brings us to the trillion-dollar question. And the manifesto makes a very bold, counterintuitive assertion here.
Which is?
Capital is not the barrier. A lack of credible execution capacity is the barrier.
Really?
The money is already out there. Global capital markets, pension funds, and institutional investors are sitting on oceans of cash, and they are desperate for predictable, stable, long-term returns.
Okay.
Just looking at the United States, the municipal bond market alone is worth over $4 trillion.
But wait, if a city is broken, if the lakes are foaming and the traffic is paralyzed, its credit rating is probably garbage.
Right.
Who in their right mind is going to lend a failing, fragmented city billions of dollars to build a deep tunnel sewer?
Which is exactly why the sequence of this blueprint is non-negotiable. You cannot ask for the money until you fix the governance.
So the $1 million mayor comes first.
Exactly. When you install a highly competent CEO mayor and tear down the overlapping fiefdoms, you instantly lower the perceived risk of corruption and bureaucratic delays.
That makes sense.
Good governance turns debt from a terrifying liability into a highly attractive investment.
It is exactly like a tech startup seeking venture capital.
It's a perfect analogy.
If you walk into a VC's office with a disorganized pitch deck, no prototype, and a history of the founders fighting with each other, you get laughed out of the room.
Nobody will give you a dime.
But if you walk in with a rockstar founder, a totally bankable business plan, and clear, transparent metrics for success, investors will literally line up to throw hundreds of millions of dollars at you.
That is the exact mechanism. When a well-governed city needs to build a multi-billion-dollar water recycling plant, it doesn't have to go begging to the central government for a taxpayer handout.
Right.
It bypasses the federal bureaucracy and goes directly to the global markets by issuing municipal bonds.
Let's break down the mechanics of a municipal bond for the listener, because it really is the engine of urban growth.
A municipal bond is essentially an IOU.
Okay.
The city says to the global market, lend us $1 billion today to build this metro line, and over the next 20 or 30 years, we will pay you back your principal plus a steady interest rate.
And why do investors like that?
Investors love this because the returns are often tax-exempt and relatively safe compared to volatile corporate stocks.
And for the city.
The city gets the massive upfront cash infusion required to build the infrastructure immediately, rather than waiting decades to save up tax revenue.
But the city still has to pay that money back with interest. How does building a park or a sewer generate the revenue to pay off a billion-dollar bond?
Through a mechanism called land value capture, or LVC.
Land value capture.
Yes, infrastructure physically creates wealth. Let's use the lake example from earlier.
Right.
If you have a dead, toxic lake, the property around it is practically worthless. It smells, it is a health hazard.
Right, nobody wants to live there.
But if the city uses bond money to dredge that lake, filter the water, and build a beautiful landscape park around it, what happens to the land adjacent to that park?
The value of that real estate absolutely skyrockets. Suddenly, developers want to build luxury apartments and cafes overlooking the water.
Exactly. The city's intervention created that massive spike in private wealth.
Okay, so how do they capture it?
Land value capture is how the city claws back a portion of that newly created wealth to pay off the bond. They reassess the property values and collect enhanced property taxes. They levy betterment charges on new developments. They sell development rights near the new metro stations. The infrastructure literally pays for itself through the economic growth it triggers.
I have to pause and address the friction here, though.
Sure.
When property values skyrocket, you get aggressive gentrification. The working class people who live near the polluted lake because it was cheap get priced out of their own neighborhood the moment it becomes beautiful.
Oh, it's a huge problem.
Does the manifesto address this, or does this financing model just create playgrounds for the rich?
It is the most critical vulnerability of land value capture. If left purely to the free market, displacement is inevitable.
So what's the solution?
The blueprint argues that this is where the strong governance structure must step in. When the city upzones an area around a new transit hub to capture that land value, they must simultaneously mandate that a strict percentage of all new development be dedicated to affordable, subsidized housing.
Okay, so you force the developers to include affordable units.
Yes. You use the immense profits generated by the luxury units to subsidize the units for the working class, ensuring the neighborhood remains socioeconomically diverse.
The source also places a heavy emphasis on green bonds. Explain how those differ from standard municipal bonds.
Green bonds function the same way mechanically, but the capital is legally ring-fenced.
Meaning what?
The money can only be used for projects that have a positive environmental or climate impact. We are talking about renewable energy grids, wetland restoration, electric bus fleets, or massive wastewater recycling plants.
Why restrict the money like that?
Because there is a massive growing appetite in global finance for ESG investments, environmental, social, and governance.
Right.
Massive pension funds have strict mandates to invest billions in sustainable projects. Because the demand for green bonds is so high, cities can often issue them at lower interest rates, making the infrastructure cheaper to finance.
And Bangalore actually has historical credibility here, doesn't it?
It does. The manifesto points out that in 1997, Bangalore became the very first city in India to issue a municipal bond, raising 125 crore rupees.
So they've done it before.
Yes. The precedent exists, and as of the timeline of this source, there are active plans reviving to issue massive new bonds exceeding 1,000 crore rupees.
So the overarching sequence is a self-sustaining loop. Elite talent generates a visionary plan. That plan guarantees execution. Execution builds global credibility. And credibility unlocks capital at an unlimited scale.
That's the formula.
You don't wait until the city is rich to build the infrastructure. You fix the governance to unlock the capital that builds the infrastructure, which makes the city rich.
Which leads us to the final and undoubtedly the most aggressive component of this blueprint.
Okay, lay it on us.
Once you have financed and built this incredible baseline, the clean water, the pacified streets, the efficient transit, how does Bangalore leverage that foundation to totally dominate its primary industry?
You mean technology?
Right. How does it generate the exponential localized wealth needed to easily service those municipal bonds and elevate the entire region?
This is where the manifesto shifts gears entirely. We leave traditional urban planning and enter something that feels a bit like a cyberpunk novel.
It's very sci-fi.
The author proposes the creation of something called Accelerator City. It is described as the ultimate economic engine, the most ruthless, high-velocity special economic zone ever conceived.
The physical parameters of Accelerator City are highly constrained. It is not citywide.
How big is it?
It is proposed as a heavily concentrated physical zone within Bangalore, exactly 2 miles by 2 miles, so a 4-square-mile grid.
Okay.
The singular, unapologetic purpose of this zone is to manufacture unicorn startups companies valued at over $1 billion at an industrial scale.
Wow. It is not just a nice tech park with tax breaks and fast Wi-Fi.
No, not at all.
The rules governing who is allowed to operate inside this 4-square-mile zone are described as inherently Darwinian. What is rule number 1?
Rule number 1, you cannot rent office space here if you just have a slide deck and a dream. To enter the zone, your startup must have already raised a minimum of $1 million in verifiable funding from credible venture capitalists.
So it acts as an immediate filter.
Exactly. It keeps out the novices and ensures that only teams with proven traction, serious capital, and extreme ambition are allowed inside the gates.
Okay, but rule number 2 is the performance covenant, and this is where it gets really extreme.
Yes.
Once your company moves into Accelerator City, a clock starts ticking. You have exactly 5 years to achieve unicorn status,
Right.
a $1 billion valuation.
Right.
And if you don't,
If you hit the 5-year mark and you are only worth $500 million, you are physically evicted from the zone.
evicted, like kicked out.
Your lease is terminated. There are no extensions, no political favors, no mercy. You have to pack up your company and make room for the next cohort of hypergrowth startups.
Okay, I have to stop here. I am putting on my deepest skeptic's hat.
I don't blame you.
We just spent an hour talking about 15-minute cities, community building, pacified streets, and ecological harmony.
Right.
Now we are suddenly talking about a hyper-elitist, walled-off playground for tech bros, a zone where you are literally evicted from your neighborhood if you don't become a billionaire in 5 years.
It's a jarring pivot.
This sounds like trickle-down urbanism on steroids. Does a high-pressure zone for the ultra-elite actually do anything to help the working-class citizen of Bangalore? Or does it just create a dystopian city of haves and have-nots?
The author actively anticipates the elitist criticism.
I would hope so. How do they defend it?
The intellectual defense of Accelerator City relies heavily on the concept of extreme network effects and economic multipliers. The source argues that while equity is important for baseline services, mediocrity is what keeps cities from competing on the global stage.
Mediocrity, okay.
To understand the logic, look at Y Combinator in Silicon Valley.
The startup accelerator.
Right. Y Combinator has backed over 5,000 companies and produced roughly 80 to 100 unicorns companies like Airbnb, Stripe, and Reddit.
They're legendary.
But its phenomenal power doesn't come from the curriculum it teaches. It comes entirely from its selectivity and network density. When you put the smartest founders in a room together, they push each other.
So Accelerator City is an attempt to take the Y Combinator concept and physically institutionalize it in urban space.
Yes. By forcing all these hyper-funded, incredibly ambitious people into a dense 4-square-mile grid, you engineer serendipity.
The elite founders attract the absolute best software engineers in the world.
Exactly. And the concentration of talent attracts the biggest global venture capitalists. The VCs fund more companies, which attracts more talent. It becomes an unstoppable compounding reaction.
And inside this zone, the infrastructure acts as a global showcase. The streets utilize the perfect Barcelona superblock designs.
The water is 100% recycled NEN water.
The zone has fast-track visas for global talent, regulatory sandboxes to test AI and drone delivery, and state-of-the-art research labs. It is a glimpse of the future.
It is.
But you still haven't answered my question about the average citizen.
Yeah.
How does this walled garden help the guy driving a bus outside the zone?
It comes back to the municipal bonds.
Oh, right.
The massive, unprecedented economic explosion that happens inside that 4-square-mile zone generates astronomical corporate wealth and land value appreciation.
Okay.
That localized wealth is the engine that pays for the rest of the city. The tax revenues, the betterment levies, and the land value capture generated inside Accelerator City are precisely what back the green bonds.
The bonds that fund the affordable housing, the citywide lake restorations, and the massive public transit expansions for the entire wider metropolis.
Exactly.
See the mechanism now. It is a targeted engine of extreme, unbridled capitalism, specifically designed to fund a highly livable, socially equitable baseline for the rest of the city.
That is the theory of the blueprint.
The billionaires in the 4-square-mile zone effectively subsidize the parks and the clean water for everyone else.
Right. And the author stresses that the 5-year eviction rule isn't a punishment. It is a vital mechanism to prevent stagnation.
Because failure to hit the billion-dollar mark just means your company graduates to a different tech park elsewhere in Bangalore or India.
Exactly. It keeps the central node constantly cycling with fresh capital and the absolute highest velocity innovation on the planet.
So to bring this all together, let's step back and look at the sheer scale of the vision we've explored today.
It's massive.
We started with a fragmented, gridlocked, flooding tech hub. We realized that fixing it required a deeply integrated, systems-level approach, where mobility, water, land use, and economics are not treated as isolated problems, but as reinforcing layers of a single organism.
Right. We explored Lee Kuan Yew's philosophy of governance, treating public administration like a high-stakes corporate turnaround.
By paying market-rate, million-dollar salaries, you attract top-tier talent and structurally eliminate corruption.
We looked at how Singapore's pub closed the water loop entirely. They proved that with reverse osmosis, deep underground gravity tunnels, and bioengineered parks, water scarcity and flooding are choices, not geographic inevitabilities.
We analyzed the spatial reallocation of the city using Barcelona's superblocks and Carlos Moreno's 15-minute city.
We saw how tactical urbanism using paint and planters to create membranes against heavy traffic can reclaim the streets for people, drastically reducing pollution and commute times, even in a chaotic sprawl.
We demystified the trillion-dollar question, showing how credible governance unlocks global municipal bond markets, allowing land value capture to pay for massive infrastructure upgrades.
And finally, we explored the brutal, brilliant concept of Accelerator City, a physical machine designed to aggressively manufacture unicorn startups, generating the localized exponential wealth needed to fund the broader urban utopia.
It is a blueprint that refuses to accept incremental improvements. It demands a metamorphosis.
It really is a manual for rebuilding the airplane into a spaceship while in midair.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought to mull over. Ask yourself about your own city, wherever you live.
Yeah, look around.
When you are sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic, when you read about a bridge collapsing, or when you hear politicians complaining about municipal budget deficits, what is really going on?
Is it truly a lack of funding?
Is the technology to fix it really out of reach? Or is it simply a lack of bold, integrated, high-caliber execution at the top?
It almost always comes down to the standards we demand from our leaders.
Which brings me to one final provocative thought to consider, building off the source material we just covered. We talked about the brutal Darwinian rules of Accelerator City, the idea that startup founders are physically evicted if they don't achieve massive success in 5 years.
Right.
What if we applied that exact same ruthless accountability to our public officials? If mayors, city planners, and transit directors were fired, or literally evicted from office without their pensions, if they didn't hit a unicorn level of livability improvements within their 5-year term, how quickly do you think our global urban crises would be solved? Something to think about.